being described as one of the biggest budgets that India has ever seen, coming at a time when there is tremendous expectations from the finance minister to deliver on some of the promises that this government has made. Hello and welcome to Budget Adda. Today we come to you from CII and bringing you some of the best industry voices to get a sense of what we can realistically expect from this budget. Let's first open the house here to the industry voices and get a sense of how they are describing this budget. We've seen a number of adjectives being used, from game changer, make or break budget, the one budget which will change the economy forever. But let's get realistic and try and get a sense from the industry people here as to what this budget really means for India and for them. If I could start with you, Mr. Ade Sriram, share with us whether you believe this is going to be a game-changing budget.
You know, I think every budget is important. There's no two ways on that. I think that's the culture and history of the country for the last many, many years. At the same time, in the last 7-8 months, if you see the changes government has already initiated, whether it's FDI or ease of doing business or direct transfer or opening up the economy in various ways, I think initiatives now, as the government says, are going to happen every day of the year. So budget is not a one-time annual exercise. Are
you tempering down expectations? Are you saying it's not going to be that big bang budget? No.
No, I don't know what actually big bang means. I must be honest with you.
Right.
I think what's important is laying down a little longer-term path of thinking of what is a roadmap for economic growth and job creation.
But haven't they done that in the last 9 months? What can they do in the budget which will be different? In fact, many are saying that there's too much of a roadmap which has been laid out.
No, I think in terms of fiscal consolidation, I think in terms of increasing consumption and investments and savings, I think in terms of ease of doing business, all these they can do a lot more, which I think will happen.
Okay.
I think it's a positive direction which will come out of this budget.
Okay, your thoughts?
See, obviously the expectations are very, very high in this particular budget, and this budget comes at a time when, the government has done 9 months and with a very strong mandate. So obviously one wants to have a strong signal coming out of the budget, signal on both growth as well as investments coming back. How do we get more investments coming back onto the ground? And second, there are several challenges. There's a challenge between growth and fiscal, but yes, the most important thing that we are really looking forward to is that really this kickstarts the economy. It's on the cusp of recovery, the economy. And you talked about some things having been done, but this would actually be expecting to trigger growth, trigger investment.
Okay, let me get a sense now as to whether that has already happened or not. We are hearing a number of industry voices, including some like Mr. Deepak Parekh, saying that, things haven't really changed on the ground. In fact, if you talk about the ease of doing business, there has been no material progress. In many ways, things are much worse than what they were earlier. Mr. Vinayak Chatterjee, you're someone who deals with a sector that's absolutely critical. Share with us where the economy stands right now. What is the state of the Indian economy? How critical is it to get that economy kick-started?
See, the macroeconomic picture is pretty simple because, if you take a simple macroeconomic construct, it's 4.5% consumption-driven growth and 4.5% investment-led growth. The two add up to the expectation, the dream expectation of a 9% GDP.
Right.
Out of the 4.5% investment-driven growth, 60% is infrastructure. So that's what's being called the big elephant in the room. So at this budget, what we are really expecting is that the government will go out and make a frontal attack on two fronts, resetting the PPP frameworks and stepping up public investment in infrastructure without great indiscipline on the fiscal control. So this is really the expectation from this budget.
All right, you've summed it up rather well, but Mr. Sanjay Reddy, first share with us whether you believe that this is the one budget that everyone is waiting to see because it can really be a game changer and the state of the economy really.
I think so, because this is frankly the first real budget of the Modi government, first full budget. And what one has to see is it's not only about expectation, but it's also about excitement, because everyone has heard Mr. Modi during the campaign, his pro-poor, pro-business approach. And everyone wants to really understand what it means. And the budget is one milestone where I think we'll get a better glimpse into his vision for India, his dream for India. So I think there's a lot of excitement. People are going to be glued to watch what exactly how he sees things and how he wants to take India forward.
Right, it's clearly not just Indian industry, but credit rating agencies, investors from around the world, everyone who's watching this budget rather closely, because as we're saying, it's the first full budget of this government, but more importantly, it has to now deliver on some of the promises that have been made by this government. Mr. Jagdish Khattar, when we pin these kind of hopes, you're always also worried about setting yourselves up for disappointment, and that's the key worry. You know, what if it is not all that big bang, and what if there isn't room to do as much as many people are expecting Mr. Jaitley would do?
Can I be a contrarian?
Please, go ahead.
See, I'm not a great believer of budget. If you look at the speeches of the previous finance ministers, the promises they made were concerned with other ministries, and they never implemented them. So I think major changes have to take place, have to come from the ministers themselves to be implemented. But anyway, I'll go along with my friends because some direction is required. But if you ask me, according to me, railway budget is more important than this budget.
Why do you say so? Why do you believe? Because in fact, on the contrary, we hear many voices saying the railway budget is not even needed.
No, railway budget is not needed, it's the structure. They are talking about the structure and the manner. But the fact is, railways is the lifeline of the entire industry in the country. It needs so much of investment. Government doesn't have money. Does Mr. Suresh Prabhu, is he coming forward with some innovative ideas to make investment in railways? Because it will give a boost to many other industries.
Right. Anshuman Magazine, if I could come to you first to get a sense of what is the state of the economy with regard to the housing front, the real estate market, because that in many ways represents a very, very important part and gives you a dipstick into the actual state. We're told the housing market is in a very bad shape. There are simply no buyers. Demand is not picking up. And that's why it's important for the finance minister to resolve this part of the puzzle, because unless he gets demand going, the economy will not get kick-started. First, share with us how bad is the environment.
It's fairly bad, but most of it is in Delhi and Mumbai, which are the high because the prices went up at crazy levels. So the market is actually worse than what someone can perceive. Other cities,
housing market has it been as bad in a really long time? Maybe just after the recession as well, the global recession 2008. Are we seeing the worst numbers right now coming out of key markets like Delhi and Mumbai?
We are seeing the worst sales numbers ever.
Okay.
Ever in the sense since even after the global financial crisis, it wasn't that bad,
right,
especially in Delhi and Mumbai. So the situation is quite bad. Luckily, the only saving grace is the commercial market is doing well. Some investments are coming in, but the housing market is in a terrible state. And therefore, this time, if you're talking about housing for all, which is a major announcement by the government, there has to be a huge push in giving incentives both to the consumer, be it from tax point of view or subvention of interest rates, and to the developer, incentivize enough so he gets enough fiscal incentive to develop real estate. So both, so this budget is extremely important. I think not only it will set up a tone for what's going to happen next 2-3 years. I feel the budget per se is not that important, but this is the only time everybody gets together, debates. There's so much discussion. I don't think there's any time in the year when there's so much talk on what's going to happen in the economy.
Okay, so you're saying tax incentives for the home buyers is a must. It's something he must do in this budget.
Absolutely, but at the same time, even give incentive to developers and others to actually construct, because right now the biggest problem is liquidity. There's no money in the market, and whatever it can be done to get funding in both on the consumption side as well as the supply side.
All right, so as you heard, Anshuman Magazine, they tell you that in terms of sales, especially in key markets like Delhi and Mumbai, we've not seen those numbers as bad in a long time, not even after the global financial crisis. And that's why the need, absolutely imperative for him to do something, both in terms of the developers as well as in terms of incentivizing home buyers. Mr. Ravi Uppal, you're someone again who can give us a great sense into what's really happening in the economy, because your sector is also hugely critical. First, share with us the state of the economy. How is the economy looking like? How is your sector doing? And what are some of the key initiatives you're hoping to hear?
Well, unfortunately, I come from a sector which is the core sector of the economy, is manufacturing, covering mines and minerals, steel and power. And all three of them are going through a very trying time at this point of time. Steel industry has never had it so bad as they have it right now. On one hand, the Chinese and Russians have invaded the market, and on the other hand, the domestic demand hasn't risen. Therefore, steel industry is really going through a very difficult phase. We very much welcome the initiative taken by government to talk in terms of Make in India, but I think Make in India has to be done in real terms. We have to take a pragmatic view what the industry is going through, enable them, and also look at the status of the global suppliers. The Chinese, Russians, are not on a level playing field with the Indian manufacturers. So therefore, the government has to take a very pragmatic view. We've got to make sure that we don't make our local manufacturers vulnerable against, the unequal competition, which is the case right now.
Right. So you're saying industry's never had it so bad. Is it one of the worst times that you've seen in many, many years?
I would say for the steel industry is the worst that we have seen in the last 10 years.
The worst that you've seen
is the worst in the last 10 years. The demand has completely collapsed. The prices have reached a level that most of the units have reported, as you would see in the Q3, the lowest ever earnings they have had in the recent years. I think they're going through a very stressful period at this point of time. And mines and minerals have gone through once again a very stormy period. The mines across the country, whether they were steel, iron ore and others, a lot of mines were shut. They're limping back to normalcy. So the conditions in the market are still pretty bad, although government is trying all the steps to see how the mines can be revived. But at this point of time, I think what we need from government is to stimulate the demand for commodities and steel in particular. And for that purpose, my only appeal to government is kindly come with investments. The private sector is still not in a state they can invest money, and therefore the government to invest money is the main avenue that I see right now.
Okay, so that's a very, very important point coming from the industry here. The private sector actually giving a message to the government, you know what, we cannot invest. So how do you get growth kick-started? Well, clearly it has to come from public spending. But you've also got a government that has to stick to the fiscal consolidation path that is under a lot of pressure to make sure that it's not overspending. It needs to, in fact, cut down its expenditure. So how does he do that fiscal math? How does he do that balancing act where he also responds to industry people who are saying they've never had it as bad in the last 10 years, whether it's housing, whether it's steel. Sectors here, you've got top industry voices telling you we're in a bad shape. So what is it that he can do to change things around at a time when he also has to stick to fiscal consolidation? Mr. Pramanik, first of you on your sector.
So I think, we are very excited with some of the programs which the government of India has talked about. And I think whether it's Make in India, whether it's Digital India, whether it is reskilling. So we see a huge opportunity. And I think the challenge now is how do you execute on that?
Right.
So while, the what is more or less been stated as to what the government would like to do, I think we need to really get down to the brass tacks in terms of actual execution.
I'd like to take that point forward. It's important because many people are saying that we've heard the talk, you need to now walk the talk. Is there too much talk and less action happening on the ground? Are we just getting the broad blueprints but not real execution?
So that's what I'm hoping to hear from the budget, because I think we see the broad blueprints. And I think what is important now is what the government is going to do to make some of these things happen. So whether it is investment in infrastructure, whether it is in the optical fiber, the last mile connectivity, whether it is in terms of they want to use technology practically across all the different sectors. What are they going to do incentivize? What are they going to do about some of the things which is holding the industry back, which is for exports or whether it is domestic investments? I think those are the fine print which you'd like to see in the budget.
All right, so we've seen the big picture, but now we're hoping the budget will actually deliver on the fine print. Those are some of the messages coming from the industry. We slip into a quick break. On the other side, we take forward that view on what the budget can really deliver on at a time when the industry is feeling the pain. The government, on the other hand, is being told by its critics that it's a government only for the industry, not for the poor, not for the Aam Aadmi, not for the farmers. Back in just a moment. Welcome back to our special show. We are coming to you from CII, getting a sense of what the industry feels is why this budget is important, what's the state of the industry. From the SME sector point of view, from the fact that we're seeing a lot of push to the entrepreneurial spirit, is this budget very, very important? Are we going to see some important announcements?
The expectations are very large, specifically that, that's what really can start the whole cycle of job creation. It's the entrepreneurs in the country who are actually, we are as Indians rather entrepreneurial. And if we can kickstart that, and thus the aspirations and the expectations are very high as far as the budget goes, because structurally that's how it happens. So rather than hoping that there'll be a small tinkering here and there, we are hoping for a change in the whole ecosystem kind of a
approach. So it should not be just mere tinkering, but we need a bigger push. Mr. Bipin Sondhi, your thoughts clearly, especially at a time when Make in India is being given this big push. Share with us what you think can really happen.
No, I think definitely it has to be a vision which is perhaps infra-led, but infra-led leads to Make in India, which leads to job creation and skill creation in the formal sector. And ultimately, I think that's the objective that needs to be done. Now, to kickstart, because capital goods also has gone through a very difficult phase, is still going through a difficult phase, is there are projects, infra projects that have already been cleared.
Right.
These need to be tracked very, very closely. Take the 10, 20 top projects of critical importance to the country and track them and execute them.
Are you disappointed with the fact that that has not been done at the pace at which many had expected? Quick word.
Yeah, I think it should be done faster. And now is the time to do it because expectations are high and people are looking for that.
Sumant Sinha, is there impatience setting in right now at a time when the industry is really saying, you know what, we had expected things to move faster, ease of doing business, a lot more had been expected from us, and yet we're not seeing the government deliver at the pace. The government on the other hand says, you know what, we're doing things a bit too fast.
Well, clearly from the comments that you've heard here, it does seem to be the fact that things are bad. Things are actually quite bad, and there is obviously a desire to get out of the bad situation that we find ourselves in. But you know, the ship of state moves slowly. It takes time to turn this huge sort of tanker around. And 9 months to me is just too short a time. I think it's going to take much longer. It may take another year or so. Even this budget may not be adequate before you actually start seeing the green shoots of recovery truly show up. So I think, yes, there is need for impatience, but I think at the same time we have to temper our expectations with the fact that, look, for example, cost of capital, which is such an important input into everybody's business, right? Even for consumers, it's so important. I think it's going to take at least another year before it goes down by 75 basis points to 100 basis points. And that, to me, is going to be one of the most important kickstarters of the economy.
And for that, it's very important for the government, particularly to deliver on its fiscal consolidation roadmap, because the RBI is watching closely. If the government delivers, the RBI delivers, and so on. Mr. Sani, quick word from you.
Well, in my opinion, the budget is a statement of accounts, of course, and the government does need to function for the other 364 days with policy initiatives. What I think we're looking for in this budget itself is an impetus towards fixed capital formation and investment and incentivization for demand creation for investment.
How bad is the demand situation right now?
Well, in our sector, we're finding the situation, as you've heard from others, possibly at the lowest level over the last 10 years. So if it wasn't for exports, and I think that exports is a very important push that has to be given by the government for manufacturing, because it allows for truly competitiveness to shine through, as well as opens up other markets which can be a sort of, well, it's a lower hanging fruit than for demand to start getting created in India by itself. But we're optimistic with the fact that this budget has to lay out a vision for the next 5 years.
Right.
The budgets that will follow on from this one would have to be based on what is being said.
Today, and which is why the importance of this particular budget, because, you know, time and again you're seeing across sectors people saying things haven't been as bad, and then how do you turn it all around if you can't do it in this budget? Vinod Sharma, your view really on how bad the situation is for the industry. How do you think this budget can turn things around rather quickly?
I come from the electronics manufacturing industry, so we are one sector where the demand is really not such a big problem.
Right.
In fact, our problems are far more on the supply side.
Okay.
This is a sector that went to zero duty, as we all know. We are looking at the budget from a Make in India perspective. That is this just an aspirational statement, or really things are going to happen on the ground? Specifically because...
So far have things happened on the ground?
Not really, but we are very, very hopeful in this budget. To give you a simple example, taxation in our sector, because the customs duty are zero, is much lesser for a trader than for a manufacturer.
Right.
Now, at least if that one thing gets set right, which is CST and SAD being abolished for this sector, then I think that we would get the right signals for investments to flow into our sector. If not, then we would really be we would be very surprised if that doesn't happen, because as the Prime Minister himself has said, we are aiming for a zero net import by 2020.
All right, so as you're seeing plenty of expectations really being lined up here, the industry really saying things are very, very bad. The other important aspect will of course be that will it be a reformist budget? Also at a time when we're seeing a lot of noises about certain reforms like Land Acquisition Act. Very quick word before I wrap up, Vinayak Chatterjee, on what's really happening on the land acquisition front. A lot of protests taking place where we are seeing that the government needs to make the amendments more pro-farmers. Quick word because I'm running out of time.
Look, the basic thing is that the government has now included public-private partnerships as within the definition of public purpose.
Right.
And if you have defined it as public purpose, then you don't need social impact assessment or 80% consensus, but you keep R&R and compensation constant.
Right.
I personally think that the definition of PPPs in public purpose is very practical, is in national interest.
But you've got a united opposition really saying that the bill right now is too pro-industry. Quick word on that.
Well, it's actually pro-growth. Now, if that can be...
Anti-farmer?
Not necessarily. Pro-growth doesn't necessarily translate into anti-farmer. Pro-growth is good for the country and therefore good for the farmers too.
All right, so pro-growth is also pro-farmer. Those are some of the dilemmas that the finance minister will be facing as he delivers the speech on the 28th. Will it be a reformist budget or a populist budget? Will the budget be pro-industry or pro-farmer? That's something we'll find out only on Saturday. Thanks so much for watching. Goodbye.